Good morning, brother. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How you doing this morning?
Man, I'm great, great. Back in Houston. Last time we got together, I was in Fort Valley, Georgia, down there working on a project. So glad to be back home in my office.
Nice, nice, nice.
All right. Well, hey, thank you for everybody that's listening today for another episode of Motivation and Mindset. I am James Morris, President and CEO of TMC Workforce Solutions, a national staffing firm. Excuse me, and consulting. We supply temp labor to businesses across the United States. We also have distribution fulfillment. So we help companies with packaging needs and filling orders, and we got some really cool stuff going on. And I'm joined by my brother, Jermaine.
I am Jermaine Morris out of Sacramento, California. I'm a certified coach and consultant with a practice based around a DISC assessment. My philosophy is basically self awareness without judgment. And so I use that as the premise of just kind of helping us better understand ourselves, not through the lens of if it's good, bad, right, wrong, but just what is, how do we operate, and how do we interact with each other.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm glad you joined us. So I love this forum that we put together, and we get to, we've been able to get together and talk about different topics that are impacting, people just like us in business and on the personal side. And I tell you, the feedback that I've been getting has been so positive, and people seem to be so appreciative. And sometimes I wonder, hey, how long are we going to keep doing it? And people are just like, man, keep it coming. So hey, as long as you're willing, I'm willing. So, one thing I like to tell everybody before I start talking is I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not prescribing anything. We're two brothers. We get together every week and we talk about real life issues that are impacting us. And I think our goal is to help somebody. If we share something that can be of help or give, if nothing else, put something on your mind. So that's what we're doing. So today, we have an interesting topic. We're going to talk about focus. And what we're really talking about is focusing, you know, strength versus weaknesses. And, this is something that I've always heard, right? And I can remember growing up, maybe when I was playing basketball as a kid, and some of the coaches would be saying, well, focus on your strengths, which might be shooting. But I have another coach that say, well, you need to focus on improving your weaknesses,
Yeah.
which might be free throw shooting. And you start to wonder, where do you put your efforts, right? And so what do you think about that? Focusing, when you're going through something or when you're just walking a path or completing a task, do you focus on your strengths or do you focus on your weaknesses?
So I would say I focus on my strength, but I always try to be aware of my weaknesses. So if there's, I'll try to find the path through my strengths. So if there's something that I'm dealing with, what are the things that I'm good at? How are the approaches I'm good at it? Okay, can I get there through them? It's kind of how I start.
Okay.
So what that might look like is if I'm having, so communication is something that I is a strong suit.
Okay.
Math, not so much. so it's so if I'm dealing with, like, just an example, if I'm dealing with stuff. So in school, math wasn't my strong suit. Every year I took math, I had to take math in summer school. But language, speech, any drama, any of this projecting, talking, all that sort of stuff, I was good at. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't look at life and say, okay, let me start getting a better tutor in math. Let me start upgrading math. I found careers and professions that had to do with me talking. Like, because that's what my strength was. So if I was like, well, let me find a job, something I want to do, a business I want to start, how can I do that through my strength? And so I didn't get better at math. I
Right.
just better developed the skill sets that I was strong in.
Yeah. See, so I'm going to take it really from a business
Okay.
perspective. So me as a business owner, if I think about my strength, my primary strength that my go-to, and then I think about the thing that has probably been a deterrent for me.
Okay.
So my strength has always been operational execution.
Okay.
So I'm the type of guy you can parachute me down into any environment and I can go improve it, right? Doesn't matter if it's a warehouse, account management, an accounting situation, a customer service situation. Operational execution has always been a strength. So throughout my career as an employee, my leadership always pushed me toward my strengths. Well, now as a business owner, operational excellence, execution is very important, but so is business development. So when I say business development, now I'm getting into kind of the opposite of you: sales, marketing, commercials, you know, designing the fancy brochures and cheap plug there. But and so what I have found is that in my business, while I focused on my strengths of executing on the business, it actually began to hurt me to not focus on my weaknesses, which was sales, right? How do we grow the business? Because what I found is, okay, for years, we're just executing. Customers love us because we're a safe set of hands and we execute. But if that one customer goes away, I've not put any effort on the business development side, which is my weakness. Because I don't like when I call somebody up and they hang up on me. Nope, not interested. Click. I get about 100 of those for everyone that will listen. But so what I've had to do was learn, and I've taken some courses. I've bought a lot of books, and I've really started to focus on how can I make business development, new business sales, marketing, social media. How can I make that a strength? Because I don't really have the liberty as a business owner to not focus on my weaknesses, but it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge.
Yeah, it's so I like I said, I don't. So one thing I was preface, it's not about just working on strengths and ignoring my weaknesses. So I try my best to get there through my strengths first. And then there are some bridges that can only be crossed going through the areas that I'm not as good at. So like examples of what that's looked like in life is that my ability to communicate with people, and I always say I don't know things, but I know people. And so a good idea of who I'm looking at, like I get a pretty good gauge of who I'm interacting with, and talking to them relatively briefly, and get a fair idea of how to communicate better with them. So I could be in work environments where I could create relationships with people who were better at my weaknesses, which help facilitate something faster.
Absolutely.
Or I figured out ways when I was put in positions where I was leading people, I found ways to get through my strengths more productivity out of the people who were already good in particular areas.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, and what that looks like, personally, I've had some weaknesses in my life that I had to address. Like there was some, when it comes to dealing with people a certain way, or boundaries with folks and approaching things in specific, like some of that stuff had to be addressed. Like some of that stuff you just can't just, well, I'm gonna smile my way through it. No, sometimes you gotta check somebody. Sometimes you want to be this way and you're really trying to be this way, but occasionally you got to be that way.
Yeah. I get that. I didn't mean to cut you off a little bit there. One thing I was really thinking about, you prompted me to think about when you talked about being in leadership roles. Yeah. What I have actually found as an entrepreneur is that addressing my weaknesses on the overall dynamic has been easier, because one of my strengths is as a team builder. And so as a team builder, what I've been able to do is, my strength is operational, as I said, operational excellence, but I'm not an expert as a human resource person. Okay. So I went out and hired the best HR director that I could find, right? Who was actually the HR director for me in corporate America. While my education is in finance, I'm not a CPA, but I was able to hire the CPA from one of the companies that I acquired. So now, while I may be a generalist, a general manager is,
Yeah.
which was the top hat in the organization I came out of, I've been able to hire a team of specialists. So I can be the generalist, but when it comes to HR, I have a specialist. When it comes to accounting, I have a specialist. When it comes to IT,
Yeah.
I have a specialist. And so that's one way that I've been able to address kind of my strength now may not be in the specific areas, but it's really as a leader, as a team builder, that's my strength. And I'm hiring people to be in the gaps that I would perceive as weaknesses for myself because I wouldn't be my own HR manager.
Yeah.
Right. I wouldn't be a dentist pulling my own teeth. Right. That would
Yeah.
just be ridiculous. So that's kind of how I've addressed it from a team perspective. But I want to hear from you. Then I'm actually going to share a very specific example of what we're going through in business today at TMC.
Okay. So if you're somebody, so taking that to what does that look like when you're dealing with people in life? Um, so we may be somebody who's really our strength is in being direct, straight to the point, like military style, just barking orders, get this done, execute. And we can have multiple children who one of them, that is a language they respond to, but one of them it doesn't. They don't.
Right.
And so if you're going to say, I'm going to stay on my strength of doing it this particular way, you'll reach one and you'll reach a level of resentment with the other.
Yes. Yes.
And so sometimes that weakness that we may deem as a, quote unquote weakness, that different approach, that more words than we'd like to use, those other examples of how to get something across, those are times where we have to go into that bag and start working on those skills because life may, make that a necessity. And so sometimes in relation, we'll do that, like I said, we'll favor the child who's just like us, not intentionally, but just because they relate to us. They get us.
Yeah. And you get them.
Yeah.
You know what they're going to do before they do it.
We speak the same language.
Yeah.
And then for the one that doesn't, or the ones that don't, then it's kind of like there's this disconnect. And I'm such and such, I'm not going to change. They need to figure it out. They're looking at like, that ain't me. I'm not going to, and there can be rifts. And that same thing applies even in relationships. Yeah. We come into a relationship a particular way. This is our skill set and how we communicate, how we deal with our emotions, how we figured out our strengths and how we cope and deal with life. Mm-hmm. That may not be the most compatible with the mate we choose. So there may be some ways, this level of vulnerability or this expression of emotion or this style of communication, I'm not the strongest at. But we realize it then becomes necessary to facilitate the relationship that we're in. Right. So maybe you're not a hugger, but if you want to keep her, you gonna learn to hug.
Right. Well, we've talked about the power to pivot, right?
Yeah.
And it comes back to something that we talked about early on, which is sometimes focusing on your weaknesses. You have to be willing to become uncomfortable, right? And you almost have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's something that I've talked to my teams about. We have to learn to get out of our comfort zones. I know even with me, I think about my communication styles, right? And I think about sometimes I just rather not say anything. Let me just show you. Yeah. But that's not always sufficient, right? Because my strength is let me live through action. My weaknesses may be let me verbally communicate the plan so that everybody's on the same page. I'm like, just move. It's done, isn't it? Yeah. Why are we talking about it? So, even I have realized I've got to learn to, be comfortable being uncomfortable and change, the languages. But, when we talk about, focusing on strengths and weaknesses, I'll give you an interesting situation. This year, we came out of the COVID. One of my businesses is a staffing business. You've seen in the papers, every company you can imagine is laying off and everyone's doing cutbacks. So when you're in the people business, that hits close to home, right? And we've actually gone through a period where our headcount was down 80%, right? We had two publicly traded clients say that we're not taking any people right now. So 80% reduction in headcount, which is pretty significant. I own another company which is more distribution fulfillment. Companies are bringing me in to be more efficient than they are. Packaging, postponement, storage, like I said, distribution. Well, we got to the end of Q1 and we had one business that was absolutely on fire. I mean, it was in a good way.
Yeah.
Like we're record sales. We had a record Q1 on our way to having a record Q2, margins higher than we've ever seen them. Then I got another business, which is our core business, that we were like, man, I hope we don't have to lock the doors. I mean, it was very scary. And so the problem, I don't want to say problem, but so one of the challenges that I've had in my focus is as I sit down and I give myself my pep talks, I'm asking myself, do I focus on the business that's booming, or do I focus on the business that I need to, pull out of the ashes?
Mm-hmm.
Like one's on fire, one's in the ashes. So, and it's a challenge, right? Because you're compelled to want, hey, let's go with the one that's working. We're seeing the revenue, we're seeing the profits, but long term, the parent company, the larger firm, we have to recover. So it's really been a tug of war for me is where do I put my efforts? So I've had to step back and says, okay, this is where I go back to my teams and I start to assign people, right? Because, I've had to learn I can't do it all myself anyway. And that's tough for me. I'm a control freak, as you know. I'll do it all. I'll just work 8 more hours a day. Not a big deal. But, that's just something that I've been going through, just that real, where do I focus my efforts? Do I focus on what's going well or do I focus on fixing what's going poorly? And so I'm assuming that on the relationship side, there's probably a lot of that too.
Yeah, there are so there's different relationships as opposed to like companies. So like I said, the companies you can't get rid of, I said, like your children. Friendships, you may decide if it's too difficult, I can just let this one go. Or if this relationship is having problems, you may be willing to part with them. But your kids, those are the companies you created that aren't going anywhere.
Right.
And so if you have a child that is relatively obedient, that you don't have, the other said, this is not my problem child. You'll hear about those types of, this is my angel. This is my easy one. This is, with all those types of phrases that we use. And so if I have to, where am I delegating my energy? I've got the child that gives me no problems, but has all these extra activities and things they want to be a part of, or the child that gives me more problems. You can feel compelled to be like, well, I want to pour into the one who seems like they're trying. I want to pour into the one that seems like they're going to do something. And then the one that's struggling, it can be a hard, okay, well, do I pull my resources and my time away from the one who I know is trying their best and thriving to pour in the one that seems like they just couldn't care less? You know what I
mean? And that's a tough one, right? As you know, your nephews are all very different.
Yeah.
All very different personalities. And I've gone through situations where, and they go through their phases, right? So they can all be great and they can all be turds, right? So just, but you get into situations where one seems to be doing everything right. And you're compelled to, like you said, okay, I'm going to go with this one. This one, he's trying, and then you see one struggling, and the parent in you is like, well, he needs my time, he needs my attention. Yeah. But then what you have to be careful of, and balance is so important, because before you know it, the one that's doing everything, what appears to be right is struggling because he's like, well, I'm doing everything right and I'm not getting any love. Yeah. I'm getting neglected. This other one is doing whatever he wants he just wants attention. Yeah. It don't matter if it's good attention, bad attention. He's got more of me. So, I mean, so much is just requires balance, right? And it's so hard as a business owner, as a parent, as a spouse, like finding that delicate balance. And I guess, it comes back to what you said earlier is, communication becomes key.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to communicate, hey, this is why I'm doing it, right? Joshua needs a little extra time and attention right now, but I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
You can't give all the attention to Josh because, James or Darius needs time also, right? Or, at home, I'm just envisioning, I'm going to make sure that I take care of you while you're sick, or, I'll do the laundry this month. I may not be talking about it, but let me just do it because hopefully you'll pick up on the fact that while the communication may be a weaknesses, what did they say? Demonstrate, don't explicate.
Yeah.
I'm
heard that one.
Yeah, and heard that one.
Uh-uh.
Yeah, be about it, don't talk about it. But yeah, I like. I'm a Robert Greene guy, so we talk about and I'm not saying that this is right, but one of the things I read about is communication, and one of the downfalls is so often over communication. It's one thing to be thought of as a fool; it's another thing to open your mouth and confirm it.
Yeah.
So they talk about demonstrate, don't explicate. We just went through something where the Lakers were playing Memphis, right? And you got this cartoon character, Dylan Brooks, who's explicating, right? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get you. I'm going to beat you down. You old.
Yeah.
That's explication. Well, you got LeBron says, I'll demonstrate. I'm going to give you 20 and 20. I'm going to give you the 40 piece you asked for. So I think what I tend to find myself doing, and I'm not saying it's the best method, but I find myself, okay, let me just do better.
Yeah.
And maybe the weakness that needs to be addressed is, let me explain to you, I recognize what I've done wrong, and here's my plan to improve it. So
yeah, because the communication part, I understand not wanting to over communicate, and typically that comes when the words outweigh or outpace the action.
Right.
So it's not how. So if somebody's like, "How do you over communicate?" It's not how much you said; it's how much you said in relation to what was done.
Okay.
So if we're talking about, I'm gonna clean the gutters out on the roof.
Yeah.
And then I explain every way I'm going to do this, but you walk outside and look, and those gutters are still clogged. You don't want to hear about what I'm going to do cleaning these gutters out anymore.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Or if I went out and did it, I executed on a Saturday, one day of work where I knocked it out. You don't want to hear about what I did to make it happen 3 weeks later.
Right.
Like, okay, you put in 1 day of work, but I'm hearing about it 3 weeks in a row now about the 1 day of work.
Yeah.
So it's not the over communication when you're communicating more than the action that took place.
Right. Right.
And I think that when we're talking about like your businesses and then, different approaches with children, I think an area that gets kind of that can be tough is if your work and your home life, if one is succeeding and the other one isn't. So if your job is thriving, but your marriage not so much, it's easy to say the reason why I'm not home is so I can continue to be good at this job. You like this house you live in, right? You like this neighborhood, these school, and we'll pour into the thing that's working.
Right.
And not work into the thing that's not.
Yeah.
Or we'll have a great relationship, and those are the people that can't seem to find their way to work.
Yeah.
Like they always want to be up under somebody.
Right.
And they calling in sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think really what I'm hearing, and I my mind kind of goes to something else, but when you talk about strengths versus weaknesses and where to focus, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. I really think it comes down to the answer is both, and it's appropriate balance, right? You can't just focus on your strengths. I'll give you an example of a very good friend of mine, Tony Jones. I'll give you a shameless plug. He's the owner of Mo City Fitness, one of the largest minority-owned fitness centers in the city of Houston, and he's an old teammate of mine. And one thing Tony will talk about is we're lifting weights, right? So we're going in the gym and we hitting it, and we building up the chest and the shoulders and the back and the quads, but I'm leaving there and I'm going to Wendy's, right? And
a little counterproductive there.
Yeah. I'm leaving there. I'm going to Wendy's, and you can't out train. So you're like, well, my strengths is my weight routine.
Yeah.
My weakness is my diet.
Yeah.
Well, you can't out train a bad diet.
Yes.
So the only answer has to be balance. Maybe I can't train as hard as I did, but I need to eat better.
Yeah.
Right.
And so sticking with somebody right there, because I think it's a good thing to also keep in mind is when we speak about balance, it doesn't mean that you have the same amount on both sides of the scale in reference to what they are. So one car may equal 50 people. So if you put your scale, well, we need to be balanced. It doesn't mean you have one car and one person, right, or 50 people and 50 cars.
Right.
So sometimes it's the weight of what we're doing is what sets the balance. Right. Because sometimes we look at things like, I gave an hour to this, so I'm going to give an hour to that. No, you only needed 20 minutes to execute here.
Right.
But you need to put an hour and 40 minutes over here, because this is what's more required for that. So I think when we speak of balance, sometimes some people in this transactional world, in this tit for tat society, everybody wants one for one.
Right.
And balance very rarely looks like one for one.
It doesn't work that way. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Well, man, that's I kind of like where the conversation's going. You hear that so much between where do I put my time? Yeah. On the business side, I've got employees, associates that there's no doubt in my mind what they enjoy doing. When I go through their deliverables, I always know these 5 things are going to be done.
Yeah.
And these 3 or 4 things are going to be late because they're the things that we enjoy doing the least.
Yeah.
Right. They're the things that may fall into the bucket of weaknesses or less fun.
Yeah.
And so, one thing that we have to do as leaders is, and parents and in relationships, is set those goals and set priorities. Right. Another thing that we talk about is understanding the difference between what's urgent and what's important.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know the difference, right? Because you've procrastinated and you've got something that's due tomorrow. Well, yeah, it's urgent because it's due tomorrow, but is it important?
Yeah.
Right. Is it something that you could have taken care of later on or whenever and took care of higher priority items? So, a lot of times it's understanding strengths versus weaknesses, importance versus urgency.
Yeah.
Again, and then I think communication is important, but I believe in demonstrating, versus explicating, right? Be about it, versus talking about it. Although, as you just said, I think there's some value in the communication piece as well.
Yeah, that's a so the gray area is all the things that we don't say. The red areas are all the things that we do that are not in alignment with what we said. So if you think about like in business, trying to be in the black, like you're trying to be when everything is good, that's ample communication where everybody understands what it is, what the responsibilities are, what the expectations are, what have you. And then the behaviors are in alignment with what was verbalized. And there's no extras, there's no surprises.
Okay.
The gray is when you get to, oh, there are problems because things weren't communicated. Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know that you was feeling that way. You never expressed to me this was a problem. I didn't, like, now I feel blindsided. Now I'm like, because of, we get in this gray area because things aren't clear. We get in the red when something was clearly expressed, but the behaviors are not in alignment with what was expressed.
Okay.
So when it's no, everybody comes in at 9 and you come in at 10:30. I thought everybody came in at 9. Like now
Yeah.
we got problems. Like
Right.
this was supposed to be this because now the behaviors are not in alignment with what was conversed. So when I look at the level of communication that's for things, that gives everybody the best understanding, because people who are doers who don't communicate, you do communicate just to yourself. So there's a full internal dialogue of what's going to be done, the system that's going to be put in place, how it's going to be executed, what's going to be the thing after. It's communicated, just not externally.
Right.
And if no one else is privy to that conversation, all they can do is react. So they just have to sit and wait to see what happens to then know where they're supposed to be or what they're supposed to do.
Okay.
So that inclusion and that collaboration and cooperation is much more efficient and effective when everybody's on the same page of what's happening.
Yeah. I think that you probably just stepped on my toes a little bit. You know, I communicate. I just communicate to myself.
That wasn't a you thing. Because there's a lot of people who just like, I got to figure this out. Okay, but in your figuring out, do you ever tell anybody what you're figuring out?
Right.
I got a lot on my mind. Okay, but if I'm supposed to be joined at you at the hip, and I don't even know what's on your mind, I don't know what are we doing.
Right. Right.
I'm standing in the hallway, trying to hear the movie through the wall, trying to follow along. Like it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to give not an adequate amount of effort attached to what you're doing, or I'm going to disconnect and disengage because I don't feel like I'm a part of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I absolutely get that. I mean, that's, what I tend to find is a spillover from being a president and CEO of two companies.
Yeah.
To going home and being a regular guy, right?
Yeah.
Because while I try to be as much of a team player as I can, as a business owner, sometimes you got to dictate the plays.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you forget when you get home, that the game, you're not in the game anymore, and you start to dictate, hey, I'm gonna go do this, I'm gonna do that, and everybody in the house is like, well, how's that impacting the family? How's that impact the household? Who said I wanted to go to Disney, or whatever it is? Who says we want to eat chicken again for the fourth night in a row? Yeah. excuse my cough. But yeah, so I think it's pretty good. We kind of, the strength versus weaknesses and where to address, it's almost like chicken and egg discussion, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that we solve it here, but I think that we definitely prompt some good dialogue, right? I'm a big believer in, I think it's balance, as a bodybuilder, and I'm not a bodybuilder by any means, but I could look at some bodybuilders and tell their strengths are chest and shoulders. Their weaknesses is legs.
Always
right?
skipping leg day.
Yeah. Always skipping leg day. And, when I look at those guys, I'm thinking you need some balance, literally and figuratively, right? You see these big guys and they're built like snow cones, right? Real big up top and pointed at the bottom. It's balance.
Yeah.
You got to balance. You have to focus on your strengths. You got to keep things going, but you got to bring those weaknesses up. Hopefully, and something I've really tried to do is try to turn my weaknesses into strengths.
Yeah.
You look back and all of a sudden the left hand works.
Yeah.
You've turned it into a strength. So what are your thoughts, man? It's been a good dialogue. What are your ending thoughts on this?
So that's why I'm such a big fan of the assessment. And so it highlights those potential blind spots in our behavior and kind of what would be deemed as potential or possible weaknesses and how we operate. And so when you've got a clear look at, okay, these are my tendencies, I'm more prone to skip steps. Like I'm not a meticulous individual. I scan as opposed to read.
Right.
I'll flip through and get the gist of it. Like I'm good off the Cliff's notes. Like if you know that about yourself, then okay, there are some things that I need to make a point to be more meticulous about because I have a tendency not to. I'm
Okay.
aware of this exist. I'm aware that, if that's the case, if somebody brings something to me that I may not agree with them. Okay, yeah, but you do have a tendency to kind of just scan through stuff. So there's probably there could be some validity to the fact that somebody's calling you out on something.
Right.
So before I react and respond with my feelings, let me actually double check to make sure, you know what I mean? Because this is a tendency I have. So when we are aware of those things, like when you drive a car, your car has a blind spot.
Right.
The blind spot in itself is not the issue. So if you're driving and then there's a car coming up on your passenger side, back by your passenger side rear wheel, the car being there is not the problem. You not knowing the car is there is the problem.
Okay.
So if you're going to kind of change lanes or make a right, if you know there's a car back there, you can adjust for it. Either slow down to where it gets in front of you, or you can speed up so you can get a good gauge on it. Like you can understand its existence. It's when we act like this weakness doesn't exist. It's when we act like there's no car there.
Right.
And we just try to make a right turn.
Right.
That's when these things can be problematic. So if we're talking about what our focus is that, these weaknesses may not be a regularly showing up thing. So it's just good to keep in mind, okay, this is a thing, but this is a thing though.
Yeah.
So, okay, so when I'm approaching stuff, keeping that in mind of, okay, I have a tendency not to communicate. So is this an environment where communication would probably be a little bit more needed? Okay. It's not my normal go-to, but it's probably necessary here.
Yeah.
Shutting up and getting to work is maybe more inclined in here. Okay, it's crunch time. Okay, all that extra talking. Okay, that's probably not. You have a tendency to wander and waft and talk. Okay, this is probably not right here.
Right.
So when it's on that focus is because just solely relying on our strengths, I don't think is super beneficial either.
Exactly.
So understanding, okay, these are my tendencies, because that's really all they are. When we start talking about strengths and weaknesses. Tendencies of behaviors. I tend to do this more, or I tend to do this better. Okay, what are my tendencies? Am I leaning on this a little too much?
Mm-hmm.
Am I not giving this enough attention? And then being open to the idea of, okay, I may have to do stuff a little bit differently from time to time.
Yeah. No, I like that. Something that you said, and I'm just going to emphasize it just a little bit, is, you talked about the blind spot.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem isn't the fact that we have a blind spot. It's about awareness. The thing that I think we don't want to miss out on is utilize the tools that are available to you. Right. If you're driving a car, it's the blinker. It's the rear view mirror. It's a side mirror. Use those tools, right? In the workplace, you have teams. You've got human resource management. If you're somebody, I used to have a COO that I worked with a small firm, and she used to say, "I don't do math." And I said, "Don't you ever say that again in another meeting. You're running a company. You don't tell nobody you don't do math. You have an accounting manager. You have a finance manager. Go learn to do some math.
Yeah.
You don't have to become a CFO, but go learn, right? Oh, I don't do HR, or I don't understand HR policy. Utilize the tools that are available to you." Yeah. And so that's something I guess if I offer some words of advice and or encouragement, not prescribing anything, but utilizing the tools. I'm real big on that. I'm real big on, I love to read business books. I just captured a list of the top 100 business books ever written, top selling 100. And I'm actually going to start, and I've read a few.
I was about to say, you probably already knocked out half of them.
Yeah, I've read a few of them, but my goal is to complete that top 100 list over the next 3 years. So that's something, but utilizing those tools. Speaking of tools, the Entrepreneur's Encyclopedia will be coming out soon, which is
Nice.
a new book that I'm working on, which is a very, very comprehensive guide. It's going to be 1,800 to 2,000 pages. So it's not something you read cover to cover, but it's covering all the things, the aspects of starting a business, growing a business, developing a business, selling your business, dealing with issues, dealing with the government, working on getting it. It's in editing right now. So super, super excited about sharing that with the world. So a lot of stuff that you hear me talk about in business, it's going to all be covered. It's got my 30 years of experience in the book.
Nice.
And I've gone out. It's all very objective, not subjective. No opinions, no thoughts. It's this is how we do things. 1+1 = 2. So, hey man, I love getting together. This is the highlight of my week. Just talking about relevant topics, right? I know focusing on strengths and weaknesses. That's something real.
Yeah.
Whether it's in business, right? Do I focus on operations or business development? If it's in the gym, do I focus on chest or legs, right? Is it in relationships, right? Am I, communicating versus doing? Am I demonstrating or am I just explicating?
Yeah.
Am I devaluing the value of the communication? So I love it, man. This is all you bring such great perspective and insight, man. So I appreciate it. It's therapy for me too. Hey, how can people find you?
First off, thank you. And I always appreciate us getting together doing this. For me, if anybody's interested in the assessment or questions on the coaching stuff, they can go to mykeystome.com. That's MYKEYSTOME, mykeystome.com. Go to that website. It'll give you information on the assessment, different coaching stuff. You can set up a consultation and we can talk about it, get you started if you're interested. And then all social media platforms are at J Morris CEO.
Awesome, awesome. I definitely encourage people, whether it's in business or just your personal life, if you want a better insight into you, I definitely encourage you to reach out to Jermaine and get your assessment done. It comes with a full report and he breaks it down. It's very valuable. Again, I'm not just a supporter, but I'm a customer, as I like to say every week. Every salaried employee that goes to work for TMC does a DISC assessment, and it has improved our turnover dramatically. So it's awesome. I'm the big brother. I'm James Morris. President and CEO of TMC Workforce Solutions. We're a national staffing company. So if you're, Texas, Indiana, Kentucky area, if you're looking for a job, I encourage you to go to www.tmcworkforce.com and look for a job. If you're a company that's looking for a firm to do staffing, recruiting, consulting, you want somebody dependable, you want somebody nationally certified, reach out to us at TMC. We can help you out. But this has been a great, great conversation. I'm going to continue to focus on my strengths and my weaknesses and try to get better at the weaknesses. I'm going to try to get better. I'm going to get stronger at the strengths. And hey, man, if there's nothing else, let's get together next week and we'll chop it up some more.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And
Awesome.
everybody else, see you next week.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate you listening.